I've opened this door 1,000 times, but this time, it ends everything.
I should have known something was wrong when Marta started buying expensive lingerie from Victoria's Secret instead of her usual 3-pack cotton underwear from Walmart. But like most husbands who've been married for 22 years, I figured it was just another phase. Like her brief obsession with CrossFit or that month she tried to become a vegetarian. My name is Jake Morrison, and I run Morrison's Auto Body Shop on the east side of Millbrook, Indiana. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps my hands busy. I've always been good with my hands, used to box amateur fights back in the day before I met Marta and settled down. These days, the only fighting I do is with rusted bolts and insurance adjusters. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was 3 hours into a drive to Louisville for a parts auction. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks, a chance to score some rare components for a '67 Mustang restoration I'd been working on. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty except for the occasional semi-truck, and I was feeling pretty good about life. "Hey, beautiful," I said when Marta's face appeared on my phone screen. I had it mounted on the dashboard for hands-free calling, though the video quality wasn't great with the spotty cell service. She looked different somehow. Her hair was done up in some fancy style I'd never seen before, and she was wearing makeup, even though it was past 8 o'clock on a weeknight. Behind her, I could see our bedroom. The same bedroom we'd shared for over 2 decades, with the floral wallpaper she'd insisted on and the antique dresser that belonged to her grandmother. "Hi, honey," she said, but her smile seemed forced. "How's the drive going?" "Not bad. Should be at the hotel in about an hour. You look nice. Going somewhere?" "Oh, just had dinner with the girls from work. You know how it is." I was about to respond when she suddenly looked over her shoulder as if someone had called her name. "Hold on just a second, Jake. I think I left something on the stove." She set the phone down on the nightstand, and that's when I saw them. Clear as day, sitting right there on my side of the bed like they owned the place. A pair of men's work boots. Brown leather, size 11 or 12 by the look of them, with mud still caked on the soles. Now, I wear work boots myself, but mine were currently on my feet, pushing the gas pedal of my F-150. These boots were definitely not mine. They were too new, too clean except for that fresh mud, and they had the kind of fancy stitching that screamed, "I paid $200 for these at some outdoor lifestyle store in the mall." I stared at those boots for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds. My mind went through the logical possibilities. Maybe she was cleaning them for someone. Maybe they belonged to a repair guy who'd been working on something in the house. Maybe there was some perfectly innocent explanation. But deep down, in that part of your gut that knows things before your brain catches up, I already knew the truth. Marta came back into frame, slightly out of breath. "Sorry about that. False alarm." "Nice boots," I said, keeping my voice level. "Too bad they're not mine. Maybe you finally found someone who likes your tofu casserole." She glanced back toward the bed, and I saw the exact moment panic flashed across her face, but she recovered quickly. I had to give her credit for that. "Oh, those. The repair guy left them here earlier. He was fixing the bathroom sink and didn't want to track mud through the house." Thoughtful of him. What company was he from? Johnson Plumbing. You know, the one we used last year? I did know Johnson Plumbing. Old Pete Johnson had been fixing pipes in Millbrook for 30 years, and he wore the same beat-up Red Wing boots every single day. These fancy boots belonged to someone else entirely. "Well, tell him he can pick them up when I get back tomorrow," I said. Wouldn't want him to catch cold without his boots. We chatted for another minute about nothing important. The weather, what she'd had for dinner, whether I remembered to lock the shop before I left. Normal married couple conversation, except now it felt like we were both reading from a script. After I hung up, I drove the rest of the way to Louisville in complete silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of my truck's engine and the occasional rumble of passing traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. 22 years of marriage, 2 kids in college, a mortgage, joint bank accounts, shared dreams of retirement, and now there were strange boots on my side of the bed. I checked into the Red Roof Inn just after 9:30 and sat on the edge of the scratchy comforter staring at my phone. I could call her back, demand an explanation, start a fight that would probably end our marriage right there over a video call. Or I could wait, think it through, figure out what I was really dealing with. The smart money was on waiting. If Marta was having an affair, and those boots suggested she was then confronting her now would only give her time to cover her tracks. Better to come home early, catch them in the act, get the proof I'd need for the divorce proceedings. But as I lay there in that cheap hotel bed, listening to the couple in the next room arguing about money, I realized I wasn't thinking about divorce proceedings. I was thinking about revenge. You see, most people who know me think I'm just a simple mechanic who fixes cars and minds his own business. They don't know about the years I spent in boxing rings, taking punches from guys who hit like sledgehammers and getting back up every time. They don't know about the patience you learn when you're working on an engine that's been neglected for 20 years. How you have to take it apart piece by piece, understand how all the parts fit together before you can make it run right again. And they definitely don't know that when someone betrays my trust, I don't get mad. I get methodical. I called the parts dealer and told him I had a family emergency, that I'd have to skip the auction and head home first thing in the morning. Then I called my best friend Jules, who owns a boxing gym and bar called the Corner Pocket on the south side of town. Jake, it's past 11, man. Everything okay? Not really. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Shoot. Have you heard any talk around town about Marta? Any gossip, rumors, anything like that? There was a long pause. Jules had been a cop for 15 years before he retired and opened the gym, and he knew how to read between the lines. What kind of talk are you expecting to hear? The kind that would explain why there are strange men's boots on my side of the bed. Another pause, longer this time. Crap, Jake. I was hoping you wouldn't find out this way. My stomach dropped. So, you did know. I heard some things. Nothing concrete, you understand, just barroom gossip. But there's been talk about Marta spending time with some new guy from her office. Slick-looking dude, drives a Tesla, always dressed like he's posing for a magazine. How long? Maybe 3 months. Look, I wanted to tell you, but you know how these things are. Sometimes it's just gossip, and I didn't want to blow up your marriage over rumors. I appreciated that Jules had been trying to protect me, but right now I felt like everyone in town knew something I didn't. What's his name? Greg something. Works at that advertising agency downtown where Marta got promoted. Word is, he's some kind of project manager, comes from money, thinks he's God's gift to womankind. Greg. I rolled the name around in my mouth like a piece of gristle. Tell me more. Not much more to tell. He's new in town, maybe 6 months. Rents that fancy smart home out on Maple Street, you know, the one with all the glass and the electronic everything. Spends his evenings at that upscale gym where all the soccer moms go to pretend they're fitness models. I knew the place. Fitness First, where a monthly membership costs more than most people spent on groceries. Marta had joined about 4 months ago, claiming she wanted to get back in shape. At the time, I'd been supportive. Now I realized she'd been getting in shape for someone else. Jules, I need you to do me a favor. I'm coming home tomorrow morning, but I don't want anyone to know I'm back early. Can you keep your ears open, maybe ask around a little? I need to know what I'm dealing with before I make my move. You got it, brother. But Jake, whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Don't do anything that's going to land you in jail or cost you everything in the divorce. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything stupid. That was technically true. What I was planning wasn't stupid at all. It was calculated, methodical, and designed to cause maximum humiliation with minimum legal consequences. I hung up and stared at the water stain on the ceiling above the bed. Tomorrow, I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. And then I was going to show my cheating wife and her fancy boots boyfriend what happens when you mess with a man who knows how to take things apart piece by piece. I left Louisville at 5 in the morning, 3 hours before I'd originally planned. The drive home gave me plenty of time to think, and by the time I pulled into Millbrook, I had the beginnings of a plan. First stop was Mrs. Kettle's house. Eleanor Kettle was our 72-year-old neighbor who spent most of her waking hours positioned at her front window like a security guard. She knew everything that happened on our street, from who got their newspaper delivered late to which teenagers were sneaking out after curfew. I knocked on her door at 8:30, knowing she'd been up for hours already. Jake Morrison, she exclaimed, opening the door in her pink bathrobe and curlers. I thought you were out of town until tonight. Change of plans, Mrs. Kettle. I was wondering if I could ask you about something. Have you noticed any unusual activity at my house while I've been gone? Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Mrs. Kettle lived for these moments. Well, now that you mention it, there was a silver Tesla parked in your driveway yesterday evening. Stayed there quite late, past midnight, I'd say. Very unusual for a weeknight. A Tesla, you said? Oh yes, one of those fancy electric cars. The driver was a well-dressed young man, very handsome. He seemed quite familiar with the house, used his own key and everything. His own key. That detail hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some spontaneous affair. Marta had given this guy a key to our house, the house we'd bought together when Ross was just a baby. Did you happen to see when he left? Around 6 this morning. He was trying to be quiet about it, but you can't hide much from these old eyes. He looked like he was in quite a hurry. I thanked Mrs. Kettle and headed home. My house, our house, looked exactly the same from the outside. Same white siding, same blue shutters, same flower beds that Marta tended with obsessive care. But now it felt contaminated somehow, like a crime scene that hadn't been cleaned up yet. I parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen. Everything was spotless, which was unusual for Marta. She was normally a fairly tidy person, but this level of cleanliness suggested she'd been scrubbing away evidence. The bedroom told a different story. The sheets had been changed, but I could smell unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air. Something expensive and cloying, nothing like the Old Spice I'd been wearing for 20 years. The fancy boots were gone, but there was a small muddy footprint on the carpet that Marta had missed in her cleaning frenzy. I took a picture of the footprint with my phone, then sat on the edge of the bed and called my wife. "Jake, you're home early. Is everything okay? The parts auction got canceled. Some kind of electrical problem at the venue. I figured I'd surprise you." "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm just finishing up a meeting at the office, but I should be home by lunch. Why don't I pick up some sandwiches from that deli you like?" "Sounds great. Hey, did that repair guy ever come back for his boots?" A pause. "His boots? The ones he left in our bedroom yesterday. You said he was from Johnson Plumbing." "Oh, right. Yes, he picked them up this morning, very early before I left for work." Another lie. I was starting to keep count. That's good. Hate to think of the poor guy walking around in his socks. After I hung up, I drove over to the corner pocket. Jules was setting up for the lunch crowd, arranging bottles behind the bar with the methodical precision of an ex-cop. "You look like hell," he said when he saw me. "Feel worse. What did you find out?" Jules poured me a coffee and leaned against the bar. "More than you probably want to know. This Greg character, full name is Gregory Whitman, he's been bragging about his conquest to anyone who'll listen. Apparently, he sees married women as a personal challenge. What else? He comes from serious money. His parents own a chain of luxury hotels in Chicago. The Tesla is just his weekend car. He's got a Porsche and a BMW back home. This whole job in Millbrook is just him slumming it for a year before Daddy gives him a real position in the family business." The picture was getting clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was having an affair with a spoiled rich boy who saw her as a temporary amusement. "There's more," Jules continued. "Word is, he's been taking pictures." "What kind of pictures?" "The kind married men don't want to see of their wives. He's been showing them around at that fancy gym, treating your wife like she's some kind of trophy." That did it. The careful control I'd been maintaining since yesterday evening finally cracked. I slammed my fist down on the bar, hard enough to make the bottles rattle. "Easy, brother," Jules said. "Getting mad won't help. Getting even will. I need to catch them in the act. I need proof that will hold up in court and destroy both of their reputations in this town. I might be able to help with that. My cousin Danny works for the phone company. He could probably tell us when Loverboy's car is parked at your house, if you want to know when to show up. No, I've got a better idea. Something that will give me witnesses and make sure the whole town knows what kind of woman my wife really is." I told Jules my plan. He listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's either brilliant or completely insane," he said finally. "Maybe both, but it'll work. You're going to need help pulling this off. Are you in?" Jules grinned, and for a moment I could see the tough cop he used to be. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I spent the rest of the morning making preparations. First, I called my in-laws and invited them for a surprise visit to celebrate Marta's recent promotion at work. Richard and Patricia Hoffman had never particularly liked me. They thought their daughter had married beneath her station, but they were devoted to Marta and would drive the 3 hours from Indianapolis at a moment's notice if they thought she was being honored. "What a lovely idea, Jake," Patricia said over the phone. "We'll leave right after lunch. Should we bring anything?" "Just yourselves. I want this to be a complete surprise." Next, I called my son Ross at Indiana University. At 22, he was old enough to handle what was about to happen to our family. And I wanted him to hear it from me rather than through social media or campus gossip. Dad, is everything okay? You never called during the week? I need you to do something for me, son. Can you drive home this afternoon? Bring your sister if she's free. There's something important I need to discuss with both of you. Is Mom okay? Your mother is fine. She's just made some choices that are going to change our family, and I want you both to be here when everything comes out. Ross knew better than to push for details over the phone. We'll be there by 4. The final piece of the puzzle was timing. I needed to know exactly when Greg would be at the house, and I needed to make sure my surprise audience would arrive at precisely the right moment. I parked across the street from Marta's office building and waited. At 12:15, she emerged with a tall, well-dressed man who matched the description Jules had given me. Gregory Whitman was everything I'd expected. Perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, the kind of confident swagger that comes from never having to worry about money. He was also about 10 years younger than my wife, which explains some of her recent behavior. They got into his Tesla and drove toward my house. I gave them a 15-minute head start, then called my in-laws. Patricia, there's been a slight change of plans. Could you arrive around 1:30 instead? I want to make sure Marta's home from her lunch meeting. Of course, dear. We're just leaving Indianapolis now. Perfect timing. I called Ross next. Change of plans, son. Make it 1:30 instead of 4. And come to the front door. Don't use your key. I want this to be a proper family gathering. By 1:20, I was parked at the end of my street, watching my in-laws' silver Buick pull into my driveway. Richard and Patricia got out, dressed in their Sunday best and carrying a bouquet of flowers for their daughter. They had no idea they were about to witness the end of her marriage. I waited until they reached the front door, then drove up and parked behind them. Jake, Patricia called out cheerfully, the door seems to be locked. Is Marta not home yet? Oh, she's home, I said, getting out of my truck. She's just busy. Let me get the door for you. I used my key to unlock the front door, then gestured for my in-laws to go ahead of me. The house was quiet except for some faint music coming from upstairs, something smooth and jazzy that definitely wasn't Marta's usual country music. Marta, Richard called out, we're here for your celebration. No answer. I could see my in-laws exchanging puzzled glances. She might be taking a nap, I said, loudly enough for my voice to carry upstairs. You know how hard she's been working lately. Why don't we go up and surprise her? We climbed the stairs together, my in-laws, chatting quietly about the lovely flowers in the front yard and how proud they were of Marta's success at work. I felt almost sorry for them. Almost. The bedroom door was closed, but I could hear voices inside. Marta's laugh, a man's deeper chuckle, the unmistakable sounds of people who thought they had the house to themselves. Marta! Patricia called out, knocking gently on the door. Sweetheart, we're here. The sounds inside stopped abruptly. I heard frantic whispering, the rustle of sheets, someone stumbling around. Just a minute, Marta called out, her voice pitched higher than normal. I'm not dressed. I looked at my in-laws, who were beginning to look confused and concerned. Richard was frowning at the door like he was trying to solve a puzzle. That's okay, honey, I said, loud enough for everyone in the bedroom to hear. We're all family here. And then I kicked the door open. The scene that greeted us was exactly what I'd expected, but seeing it with my own eyes still felt like a physical blow. Marta was scrambling to pull a sheet around herself, her hair disheveled and her face flushed. Greg was trying to hop into his pants while simultaneously looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Patricia gasped and dropped the bouquet. Richard made a choking sound and grabbed the door frame for support, and I just stood there, taking in every detail of the tableau before me. Well, I said conversationally, this is awkward. Greg had managed to get his pants on but couldn't find his shirt. He was backing toward the window like a trapped animal, his perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. Mr. Morrison, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Greg. Is it Greg, right? Or do you prefer Gregory? I want to make sure I get your name right when I tell this story. Marta had found her robe and was clutching it around herself like armor. Jake, please, let me explain. Oh, I think the situation is pretty self-explanatory, sweetheart. You're in our bedroom, in our bed, with a man who isn't your husband, in the middle of what I believe the kids call getting busy. Patricia was making small, whimpering sounds. Richard looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Greg, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the window was his best option for escape. Our bedroom was on the second floor, but there was a large oak tree outside that might break his fall or his neck. At that moment, I wasn't particularly concerned about which. "I wouldn't recommend the window, Greg," I said. "It's a long drop and Mrs. Kettle next door has been watching the house all day. She's probably already got her phone out, recording everything for her Facebook page." But Greg was past rational thought. He fumbled with the window latch, managed to get it open, and swung one leg over the sill. "Greg, don't!" Marta called out. Too late. Greg pushed himself out of the window and disappeared from view. A few seconds later, we heard a crash, followed by some very creative cursing. I walked to the window and looked down. Greg had landed in Marta's prized rose bushes, which had broken his fall, but left him looking like he'd been attacked by a pack of cats. He was covered in scratches and rose petals, his expensive pants torn in several places. "You might want to get those cuts looked at," I called down to him. "Rose thorns can be nasty if they get infected." By now, half the neighborhood had come out to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Kettle was indeed recording everything on her phone, providing running commentary to her daughter on speakerphone. The teenage boys from 3 houses down were laughing and pointing. Even old Mr. Peterson from across the street had emerged from his house to see what was happening. Greg stumbled to his feet, tried to maintain some dignity, and limped toward his Tesla. But dignity is hard to maintain when you're half undressed, bleeding from multiple scratches, and have rose petals in your hair. "And they say yoga's good for your health," I muttered, dusting off my hands. Behind me, Patricia had started crying. Richard was helping her to a chair, his face pale with shock. And Marta was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part fear, part anger, part something that might have been respect. "Jake," she said quietly, "we need to talk." "I think we're past talking, don't you? But if you want to have a conversation, we can do it downstairs. Your parents have seen enough for one day." As we filed out of the bedroom, I could hear car doors slamming outside and the sound of Greg's Tesla speeding away. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Kettle still filming, probably already uploading the video to every social media platform she could think of. By sunset, half the town would know that Marta Morrison had been caught in bed with another man, and that her husband had literally thrown her lover out the window. It wasn't the ending I'd planned for my marriage, but it was definitely going to be memorable. The real plan for revenge was just beginning. The aftermath of the bedroom bust was everything I'd hoped for and more. By evening, Mrs. Kettle's video had been shared on Facebook over 300 times, and someone had already created a meme featuring Greg's rose petal-covered escape. The caption read, "When her husband comes home early from his business trip." My in-laws left without saying goodbye to Marta, which spoke volumes about their feelings on infidelity. Richard shook my hand on the way out and muttered something about always knowing I was a good man. Patricia hugged me and whispered, "You deserve better, Jake." Ross and Amelia arrived just as their grandparents were leaving. I met them in the driveway and gave them the abbreviated version of events. Ross took it like the man he was becoming, asking practical questions about living arrangements and legal proceedings. Amelia cried, but she was angry at her mother, not me. "How could she do this to you, Dad?" Amelia demanded. "How could she do this to our family?" "People make choices, sweetheart. Sometimes those choices have consequences they don't expect." Marta tried to talk to the kids, but they weren't ready to hear her explanations. Ross was coldly polite. Amelia was openly hostile. After an hour of awkward conversation, they both decided to drive back to school rather than spend the night. "Call me if you need anything," Ross said as he hugged me goodbye. "Anything at all." After the kids left, I sat in my living room and took stock of the situation. Marta had barricaded herself in the guest bedroom, claiming she needed time to think. The house felt different now, not like home anymore, but like a battlefield where the first shot had been fired. My phone had been buzzing all evening with calls and texts. Word travels fast in a town like Millbrook, and everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. I ignored most of them, but I did answer when Jules called. "Holy crap, Jake. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store just showed me the video. You actually threw the guy out the window?" "Technically, he threw himself out the window. I just encouraged him to consider all his options. The whole town's talking about it. I've had 12 people ask me if it's true, and 3 more want to buy you a drink." "What about Marta? What are people saying about her?" "Nothing good. The general consensus is that she had it coming. And you showed remarkable restraint by not throwing her out the window, too. That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. In small towns, reputation is everything, and Marta's reputation was now in ruins. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started noticing changes in how people treated me. The barista at the coffee shop refused to let me pay for my morning coffee. The guys at the auto parts store kept finding excuses to stop by my shop and chat. Even the mailman, who normally just nodded and moved on, started asking how I was holding up. Marta, on the other hand, was getting a very different reception. I heard from multiple sources that people were crossing the street to avoid talking to her, that her book club had postponed indefinitely, and that someone had left a note on her car windshield that simply said, "Shame." The attention was gratifying, but I had bigger plans than just social ostracism. I wanted Greg to suffer too, and I wanted the whole town to understand that actions have consequences. My opportunity came when Jules mentioned that Greg had been bragging about his athletic prowess at the upscale gym where he and Marta had apparently first met. "He's been telling everyone that he's training for a triathlon," Jules said. "Claims he's in the best shape of his life, superior to all us small-town weaklings." "Is that so?" "It gets better. He's been specifically talking trash about local guys, saying we're all soft and out of shape. Apparently, he thinks seducing married women proves how much of an alpha male he is." That gave me an idea. A wonderfully petty, satisfying idea. "Jules, how would you like to help me teach Greg about small-town hospitality?" "I'm listening. You still have contacts at the police department, right? People who might look the other way if a certain Tesla happened to experience some mechanical difficulties." "Depends on what kind of difficulties we're talking about." I explained my plan. Jules listened with growing amusement, occasionally asking questions about logistics or legal implications. When I finished, he was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "You know what, Jake? I think Greg needs to learn that actions have consequences, and I think I know just the way to teach him." The next evening, we put our plan into action. Greg had a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he went to the gym at 7 p.m. for exactly 90 minutes, then stopped at the organic juice bar next door for a protein smoothie. His Tesla was always parked in the same spot, under a streetlight where everyone could admire it. While Greg was inside working on his superior physique, Jules and I got to work on his car. We didn't do anything illegal. No slashing tires or breaking windows. Instead, we focused on creating maximum embarrassment with minimal legal risk. First, Jules used his lock-picking skills, learned during his police training, he assured me, to open the Tesla's doors. Then I went to work with my secret weapon, 3 pounds of frozen shrimp that I'd bought from the grocery store that morning. I stuffed the shrimp into every crevice I could find, under the seats, in the air conditioning vents, behind the dashboard panels. The smell wouldn't be noticeable immediately, but in a day or two, when the shrimp started to thaw and rot, Greg's luxury car was going to smell like a dumpster behind a seafood restaurant. But we weren't done yet. While I was planting the shrimp, Jules was working on the car's exterior. He'd brought a bag of biodegradable glitter, the kind used for craft projects, and was methodically pouring it into the Tesla's exhaust pipe. "What's that going to do?" I asked. "You'll see. Next time he starts the car, that glitter's going to blow out the back like a fairy tale explosion. Won't hurt the engine, but it'll be visible from 3 blocks away." We finished our work just as Greg was coming out of the gym, looking sweaty and self-satisfied. He was wearing expensive workout clothes and carrying a protein shake that probably cost more than most people's lunch. Jules and I were sitting in my truck across the parking lot, watching through binoculars as Greg approached his car. He looked around suspiciously. Apparently, word of his window-jumping adventure had made him paranoid, but didn't notice anything obviously wrong. He got in, started the engine, and began backing out of his parking space. That's when the glitter show began. The Tesla's exhaust pipe erupted like a sparkly volcano, shooting clouds of silver and gold glitter into the evening air. The glitter cloud was so dense and reflective that it caught the light from every street lamp in the parking lot, creating a disco ball effect that was visible from the street. Greg stopped the car and got out to investigate. But the damage was done. The entire back of his precious Tesla was covered in glitter, and more was still puffing out of the exhaust pipe every time the engine idled. A small crowd had gathered to watch the spectacle. most of them laughing and taking pictures with their phones. "What the hell?" Greg shouted, examining his glitter-covered car. "Who did this?" Nobody answered, but I could see people exchanging knowing looks. In a town this size, everyone knew about the bedroom incident, and most people had already chosen side. Greg got back in his car and drove away, leaving a trail of glitter behind him like a very angry fairy godmother. Jules and I followed at a safe distance, watching the show. "Think he'll figure out the shrimp right away?" Jules asked. "Give it a day or two. By Thursday, he won't be able to get within 10 feet of that car without gagging." We were right. By Thursday morning, word was spreading that Greg's Tesla had been towed to 3 different auto shops, none of which could locate the source of the horrific smell. The glitter had been cleaned off, but the stench was apparently so bad that one mechanic had refused to work on the car at all. Greg ended up having to rent a car while his Tesla was being decontaminated at a specialty shop in Indianapolis. The rental was a basic economy sedan, a far cry from his usual luxury transportation, and he looked absolutely miserable driving it around town. But the best part was yet to come. On Friday evening, I got a call from Danny, Jules's cousin who worked for the phone company. "Jake, you need to hear this. That guy Greg, he called his insurance company to file a claim for vandalism and biological contamination of his car. The insurance agent laughed so hard she had to put him on hold. They're not covering it? Nope. Apparently, there's a clause in his policy that excludes pranks and practical jokes that don't cause permanent damage. He's going to have to pay for the cleanup himself. And word is, it's going to cost him close to $5,000. $5,000 to remove rotting shrimp from a car. I couldn't have planned it better if I'd tried. That weekend, I was having a beer at the Corner Pocket when Greg walked in. The entire bar went quiet, like something out of a Western movie. Greg looked around nervously, clearly aware that he wasn't welcome, but apparently determined to prove something. He walked up to the bar and ordered an expensive imported beer that Jules definitely didn't stock. When Jules told him they only had domestic beer on tap, Greg made a face like he'd been asked to drink sewage. "Fine, whatever you have that's closest to decent." Jules poured him a Budweiser and set it down with more force than necessary. "That'll be $4. Greg threw a 20 on the bar. "Keep the change. I know you small-town people need all the help you can get." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Every conversation in the bar had stopped, and I could feel the tension building. These were good people, mechanics, construction workers, teachers, small business owners, and they didn't appreciate being talked down to by some rich boy from Chicago. I stood up from my booth and walked over to the bar. Greg saw me coming and tensed up, probably remembering our last encounter. "Greg, isn't it?" I said pleasantly. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Jake Morrison, you might remember me. I'm the husband whose bedroom window you jumped out of." A few people chuckled. Greg's face turned red. "Look, Morrison, about that whole situation." "Oh, don't worry about it. These things happen. Although I have to say, your exit strategy was pretty impressive. Most people would have used the stairs, but you went for the dramatic approach. Very theatrical." More laughter from the crowd. Greg was starting to look like a trapped animal again. "I was wondering, though," I continued, "how's your car situation working out? I heard you had some kind of smell problem." "Someone sabotaged my car," Greg said loudly. "It was vandalism, pure and simple." "Sabotaged? That's a strong word. What exactly happened?" Greg looked around the bar, realizing that he was surrounded by people who had no sympathy for him. "Someone put things in my car. Disgusting things. It cost me $5,000 to get it cleaned." $5,000? I whistled. "That's a lot of money. What kind of things are we talking about?" "Dead fish, rotting seafood." The smell was unbearable. The bar erupted in laughter. Someone in the back called out, "Sounds fishy to me," which got even more laughs. Greg slammed his beer down on the bar, splashing foam everywhere. "This is maltreatment. I could press charges." "For what?" Jules asked mildly. "Nobody here did anything to your car. We were all here, playing pool and minding our own business. Weren't we, boys?" A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. "That's right, Jules. We were here all evening. Never left the bar." Greg looked around desperately, realizing he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at me. "You think you're so smart, but I know it was you." "Greg," I said, stepping closer, "let me give you some free advice. This is a small town, and people here have long memories. You came into our community, seduced a married woman, showed disrespect to her family, and then insulted the good people who live here. Maybe instead of making threats, you should consider whether Millbrook is really the right place for you. Greg stared at me for a long moment, then threw another 20 on the bar and stormed out. The entire bar watched him go, and as soon as the door closed behind him, the place erupted in applause. "Drinks are on the house," Jules announced, "to Jake Morrison, defender of small-town values." I raised my beer and smiled. "To consequences," I said. But even as I accepted the congratulations and backslaps from my neighbors, I knew this was just the beginning. Greg and Marta had humiliated me, cost me my marriage, and tried to make me look like a fool. The glitter and shrimp were just warning shots. The real revenge was still coming. The anonymous message arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of my auto shop like something out of a spy movie. The paper was expensive, cream-colored stationery that probably cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. The message itself was typed in a formal font that screamed, "I have money and connections." "Mr. Morrison, you have no idea who you're really up against. Your little pranks are amusing, but they end now. Back off or face consequences you can't imagine. This is your only warning." I read it twice, then called Jules. "Someone's trying to scare me," I said when he answered. "Greg? Maybe, or maybe someone else. Can you come over? I want you to see this." Jules arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his boxing gloves from training a client. He read the note carefully, turning it over to examine the paper quality and watermark. "This isn't from Greg," he said finally. "This is too sophisticated for him. Greg's the type who would send angry text messages or key your car. This is from someone who understands psychological warfare." "Any idea who?" "Could be his family. Rich people don't like it when their precious children get embarrassed in public. They tend to hire lawyers and private investigators to make problems go away." That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. If Greg's parents owned a chain of luxury hotels, they probably had experience dealing with reputation management issues. Or, Jules continued, it could be someone else entirely, someone who has their own reasons for wanting you to back down. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the people around me. Was the barista at the coffee shop asking too many questions about my daily routine? Was the mailman lingering a little too long at my mailbox? Was Mrs. Kettle's constant surveillance actually surveillance? The paranoia was starting to get to me when I got a call from an unexpected source. Lana Mitchell, Marta's best friend from work. "Jake, I know this is awkward, but I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There are some things about Marta's situation that I think you should know." Lana had been Marta's closest friend for the past 3 years, ever since she'd started working at the advertising agency. She was a sharp, well-dressed woman in her mid-40s who'd always been polite but distant toward me. I'd assumed she was just one of those career women who didn't have much use for blue-collar husbands. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe on the opposite side of town from both my shop and Marta's office. Lana was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall like she was expecting trouble. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I know you probably don't think very highly of me right now. Why would I think poorly of you? You didn't cheat on me." "No, but I knew it was happening, and I didn't tell you. I've been struggling with that guilt ever since the window incident." I ordered coffee and waited for her to continue. Lana seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. In all the times I'd met her at office parties or neighborhood gatherings, she'd always been composed and confident. "The thing is, Jake, I don't think you understand what you're really dealing with. Greg isn't just some random guy who happened to seduce your wife. This whole thing was planned." "What do you mean, planned?" "Greg specifically targeted Marta. He researched her, learned about her marriage, her insecurities, her ambitions. He knew exactly what buttons to push to make her vulnerable to his advances." That was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Hunters often chose their sufferers carefully. "There's more," Lana continued. "Greg has done this before, multiple times. He has a pattern of seducing married women, documenting the affairs, and then using the evidence for entertainment purposes." Entertainment? Photos, videos, personal information. He treats it like a game, a way to prove his superiority over inferior men. He's been showing pictures of Marta to people at the gym, bragging about his conquest. My coffee cup cracked in my hand. I set it down carefully, trying to control the rage that was building in my chest. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating him. After I saw what he was doing to Marta, I started asking questions. I have friends in Chicago who know his family. The stories they told me, Jake, this man is dangerous. Not physically dangerous, but he destroys people for fun. Why are you telling me this? Why not warn Marta? Lana looked uncomfortable. I tried. She's completely infatuated with him. She thinks he's going to leave his job here and take her back to Chicago with him. She doesn't understand that she's just another trophy to him. And you think I can do something about it? I think you're the only one who can. Greg is used to dealing with men who fight him in court or try to reason with him. He's not used to dealing with someone who fights back the way you do. I studied Lana's face, trying to read her motivations. What's in this for you? Why do you care what happens to Greg? Because he's not just destroying Marta. He's destroying other women, too. There's a wife in Chicago whose marriage ended because of him. Another woman in Milwaukee who had a nervous breakdown. He needs to be stopped. Stopped how? I don't know. But I thought you should have all the information before you decide what to do next. Lana reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. These are copies of everything I could find about Greg's background. Financial records, social media posts, witness statements from his previous sufferers. Use it however you think best. She stood to leave, then paused. Jake, be careful. I meant what I said about him being dangerous. He has resources and connections that most people don't. If you're going to go after him, make sure you're prepared for him to fight back. After she left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, reading through the folders she'd given me. The picture that emerged was of a man who was much worse than I'd imagined. Greg wasn't just an adulterer. He was a hunter who specifically targeted vulnerable women and then discarded them when he got bored. There were photos of him with at least 6 different women, all of them married, all of them looking at him with the same infatuated expression I'd seen on Marta's face. There were screenshots of text messages where he bragged about his conquests and made crude jokes about the husbands he'd betrayed. But the most disturbing part was a series of emails between Greg and someone identified only as LM. The emails discussed Marta specifically, describing her weaknesses and vulnerabilities in clinical detail. They read like a psychological profile designed to help someone manipulate her. Subject is insecure about aging and feels unappreciated by spouse, one email read. Responds well to compliments about appearance and intelligence. Susceptible to narrative about deserving better and wasting potential in small town. The emails were dated from 6 months ago, long before Greg had supposedly met Marta at the gym. This whole affair had been orchestrated from the beginning. But who was LM? Someone with intimate knowledge of Marta's psychology and personal situation. Someone who had access to her private thoughts and feelings. I read through the emails again, paying closer attention to the writing style and specific details mentioned. Whoever LM was, they knew about Marta's relationship with her parents, her concerns about her career, even her favorite restaurants and movies. And then it hit me. LM Lana Mitchell. I pulled out my phone and called Jules. I need you to meet me at the shop right now and bring your laptop. We're going to do some research. Jules arrived 30 minutes later and I showed him everything Lana had given me, focusing on the emails between Greg and LM. You think Lana is working with Greg? Jules asked. I think Lana is the operation. Greg is just the pretty face she uses to seduce the targets. She's the one who identifies vulnerable women, researches their backgrounds, and then feeds Greg the information he needs to manipulate them. Jules studied the emails more carefully. If that's true, then why did she give you this information? Why expose herself? Because I'm getting too close to the truth and she's trying to control the narrative. She wants me to think she's on my side, so I'll trust her and maybe back off from my investigation. Or, Jules said slowly, she's setting you up for something bigger. Think about it. She gives you all this incriminating evidence about Greg. You use it to destroy him, and then what? Maybe she has evidence that you've been maltreating him. Maybe she's building a case to have you arrested or sued. That possibility sent a chill down my spine. If Lana was as calculating as I suspected, then she might have been planning this confrontation for weeks. We need to find out more about her, I said. Background, employment history, connections to Greg's family. If she's running some kind of long-term con, there will be evidence. Jules cracked his knuckles and opened his laptop. Good thing I still have friends in law enforcement. Let me make some calls. While Jules worked his contacts, I drove over to the advertising agency where Marta and Lana worked. I didn't go inside, I just parked across the street and watched. At 5:30, employees started leaving for the day. I saw Marta emerge first, looking tired and stressed. She got into her car and drove toward home. 20 minutes later, Lana came out. But instead of going to her car, she walked 3 blocks to a small restaurant where Greg was waiting for her at an outdoor table. I grabbed my phone and started recording as they sat down together. Even from across the street, their body language was telling they were clearly comfortable with each other, like old friends or business partners. This wasn't a chance meeting. They talked for about 45 minutes, with Lana doing most of the talking and Greg taking notes on his phone. At one point, she showed him something on her own phone that made him laugh. When they parted ways, Greg kissed her on the cheek like they were saying goodbye after a family dinner. I had my proof. Lana and Greg were working together and Marta was just their latest sufferer. But I was about to become their biggest problem. I drove back to the shop and found Jules grinning at his laptop screen. "You're gonna love this," he said. Lana Mitchell isn't her real name. She's actually Linda Marconi, and she has a very interesting employment history. Tell me. She worked for Greg's family business in Chicago until about 4 years ago, when she was fired for inappropriate conduct with clients. Apparently, she was running some kind of blackmail scheme, using her position to gather compromising information about hotel guests. And now she's doing the same thing here. Gets better. I found records of her working in 3 other cities over the past 4 years, always at advertising agencies or marketing firms, always leaving after about a year. And in each city, there were reports of prominent men being caught in compromising situations with younger women. The scope of their operation was bigger than I'd imagined. They weren't just destroying marriages for fun. They were running a systematic con game, probably blackmailing their sufferers or selling information to competitors. "Jules, I need you to help me with something. Something that's going to require your old police skills and my mechanical expertise. What did you have in mind?" I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Evidence that I'm maltreating Greg. But I'm going to make sure that evidence leads them into a trap they'll never see coming. I explained my plan. Jules listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's either the most brilliant thing I've ever heard or the most insane," he said finally. "Maybe both." "Are you in?" Jules closed his laptop and stood up. "Jake, I've been waiting my whole life to take down people like this. Let's do it." The next phase of my revenge was going to be the most dangerous yet. But if it worked, Greg and Lana would learn what it really meant to face consequences for their actions. And Marta was about to discover that her best friend had been her worst enemy all along. The town's annual Founders Day festival was scheduled for the first Saturday in October, which gave me exactly 2 weeks to set my trap. Founders Day was the biggest event in Millbrook's social calendar, a combination street fair, reunion, and gossip exchange that drew people from 3 counties. If I was going to make a public statement about Greg and Lana's operation, this was the perfect venue. But first, I needed more evidence, and I needed to make sure Greg and Lana felt confident enough to make a mistake. I started by playing the part they expected me to play. I began maltreating Greg in ways that were obvious and clumsy, following him around town in my truck, making loud comments when I saw him in public, even confronting him outside the gym where everyone could see and hear. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you, Greg?" I said during one particularly theatrical encounter outside the grocery store. "You think you can come into my town, steal my wife, and there won't be consequences?" Greg played his part perfectly, acting scared and intimidated while making sure witnesses could hear him asking me to leave him alone. I could see him recording our conversations on his phone, building his case that I was stalking him. Meanwhile, Jules was working his contacts to gather intelligence on Lana's activities. We discovered that she'd been asking questions about my financial situation, my business records, even my medical history. She was clearly building a profile on me, just like she'd done with Marta. "She's planning something big," Jules reported after a meeting with one of his former police colleagues. "Word is she's been in contact with a lawyer in Indianapolis asking about maltreatment laws and civil remedies. Let her plan. The bigger the trap she sets, the harder she'll fall when it backfires." The breakthrough came when Mrs. Kettle, my nosy neighbor, approached me with information she'd gathered during her daily surveillance activities. "Jake, dear, I hope you don't mind. But I've been keeping an eye on that woman who's been visiting your wife. The one with the fancy car and the expensive clothes. Lana Mitchell? That's the one. Well, I happen to notice that she's been meeting with that Greg fellow quite regularly. Not at restaurants or public places, mind you, but at his house. Late at night, when they think nobody's watching. Mrs. Kettle had photos, dozens of them, taken with a telephoto lens from her bedroom window. The photos showed Lana arriving at Greg's house after dark, staying for hours, and leaving early in the morning. In several photos, they were clearly intimate, holding hands, kissing, embracing like lovers. Mrs. Kettle, you're a treasure, I said, reviewing the photos. How long has this been going on? At least 2 months, maybe longer. I started taking pictures when I realized they were trying to be secretive about it. In my experience, when people sneak around like that, they're usually up to no good. The photos proved what I'd suspected. Greg and Lana were partners in every sense of the word. But more importantly, they showed that Lana had been deceiving Marta just as much as Greg had. Marta thought she was having an affair with a single man who was devoted to her. In reality, she was being manipulated by a couple who were using her for their own purposes. Now I had everything I needed for the final phase of my plan. Founders Day dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for an outdoor festival. The main street was closed to traffic and lined with booths selling everything from homemade crafts to funnel cakes. A small stage had been set up in front of the courthouse for speeches and entertainment. I arrived early and positioned myself near the stage, where I could see most of the crowd. Jules was working security for the event, a volunteer position that gave him official authority and a radio to coordinate with other volunteers. Marta showed up around noon, looking uncomfortable, but trying to maintain appearances. She'd been getting the cold shoulder from most of the town for weeks, but she was still trying to pretend everything was normal. She browsed the craft booths and made small talk with people who were polite but distant. Greg arrived an hour later, dressed in expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and scanning the crowd like he was expecting trouble. Lana was the last to arrive, and she made an entrance. She was dressed like she was attending a country club event rather than a small-town festival, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who thought she was smarter than everyone around her. At 2 p.m., the mayor took the stage to welcome everyone and introduce the day's speakers. I waited until he finished his opening remarks, then walked up to the stage and asked to borrow the microphone. "Folks, I hope you don't mind if I take a few minutes of your time," I said, my voice carrying across the crowd through the PA system. "I have something important to share with all of you." The crowd quieted down, sensing drama. I could see Marta, Greg, and Lana all turning toward the stage with expressions of alarm. "Most of you know that my wife Marta has been having an affair with Greg Whitman here," I continued, gesturing toward Greg. "That's old news by now. But what you don't know is that the whole thing was a setup from the beginning." I pulled out a folder of documents and held it up for everyone to see. This is evidence that Greg and his partner, Lana Mitchell, have been running a con game on our community. They specifically targeted my wife online, researched her vulnerabilities, and manipulated her into an affair as part of a larger scheme to extort money and information from prominent families. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Lana Mitchell, who many of you know as Marta's best friend and coworker, is actually Linda Marconi, a convicted fraudster who was fired from Greg's family business for running blackmail schemes. She's been feeding Greg information about local families, helping him identify targets for seduction and manipulation. I held up Mrs. Kettle's photos, enlarged and mounted on poster board. These photos show Greg and Lana together at his house, proving that they're romantic and business partners. While Greg was seducing my wife, he was actually living with and sleeping with Lana. The crowd erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. I could see Lana pushing through the crowd, trying to reach the stage, her composed mask finally slipping. "That's enough," she shouted. "This is maltreatment. You can't prove any of these accusations." "Actually, I can," I said, pulling out another folder. "Jules, would you join me up here?" Jules climbed onto the stage, still wearing his security volunteer badge. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a retired police officer and I've been investigating the situation for the past month. What Jake is telling you is absolutely true." He held up his own folder of documents. "We have email records showing Lana and Greg planning their operation. We have financial records showing payments from Greg's family to Lana for consulting services. We have witness statements from sufferers in 3 other cities where they ran similar schemes. Greg was trying to leave, pushing through the crowd toward the parking area, but several large men from Jules's gym had positioned themselves to block the exits. He was trapped. The most disgusting part, I continued, is that they documented everything. They have photos and videos of my wife that they've been sharing for entertainment. They treated her like she was nothing more than a trophy to be displayed. Marta had gone pale and was swaying on her feet. Several women from her former book club moved to support her, their anger at her affair temporarily overridden by sympathy for how she'd been manipulated. But here's the thing about running con games in small towns, I said, looking directly at Lana and Greg. Eventually, you run into people who know how to fight back. I nodded to Jules, who spoke into his radio. Bring them in. 2 state police officers appeared at the edge of the crowd, walking purposefully toward the stage. Behind them was a woman in a business suit who I recognized as the district attorney from the county seat. Linda Marconi and Gregory Whitman, the DA announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and violation of privacy laws. You have the right to remain silent. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Greg and Lana were handcuffed and led away. Greg was protesting his innocence, claiming he was being framed. Lana said nothing, but the look she gave me as she passed the stage could have melted steel. There's one more thing, I said into the microphone as the police cars drove away. I want everyone to understand that my wife was a sufferer in this scheme, just like the women in other cities who fell for their manipulation. She made mistakes, but she was targeted and deceived by professionals. I looked directly at Marta, who was crying openly now. That doesn't excuse what happened to our marriage, but it does explain it, and I want everyone in this community to remember that we take care of our own, even when they make mistakes. The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread until the entire festival was giving Marta a standing ovation, not for her affair, but for surviving her victimization. I handed the microphone back to the mayor and walked off the stage. The crowd parted to let me through, and I could hear people calling out congratulations and offers to buy me drinks. Jules caught up with me at the edge of the festival area. How does it feel to be the hero of Millbrook? I'm not a hero, Jules. I'm just a man who got tired of being played for a fool. What happens now? With Marta, I mean. I looked back toward the stage where Marta was surrounded by women from the community who were offering comfort and support. She looked broken, but not destroyed, like someone who was finally seeing clearly after months of confusion. I don't know, I said honestly. The marriage is over. Too much has happened for us to go back. But maybe she can rebuild her life here, with people who understand that she was manipulated by experts. And Greg and Lana? They'll go to prison. The DA has been building cases against them in multiple states. They won't be conning anyone else for a very long time. Jules grinned. You know what the best part is? They thought they were so much smarter than everyone else. They never considered that a small-town mechanic and a retired cop might be able to outsmart them. They underestimated us, I agreed. People like that always do. They think money and education make them superior, but they don't understand the value of community and loyalty. As we walked toward Jules's truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The revenge was complete, justice had been served, and my community had rallied around both me and Marta in our different ways. Greg and Lana had tried to destroy my life for their own entertainment. Instead, they'd learned what happens when you mess with people who know how to fight back. I climbed into Jules's truck and looked back at the festival one last time. Marta was still surrounded by supportive neighbors, beginning the long process of rebuilding her reputation and her life. The community that had been divided by scandal was coming together again, stronger for having faced and overcome deception. Where to now? Jules asked. Home, I said. I've got a business to run and a life to rebuild. As we drove away from the festival, I allowed myself a small smile. They had called me the villain when I threw Greg out the window and humiliated them both. They were right. I had been the villain in their story. But in my story, I was the hero who protected his community from hunters and ensured that actions had consequences. And that was exactly who I wanted to be.